Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. And guess what, folks? Monday Morning Murph is back now that the NFL season has returned. And what better man to talk to after a disappointing Minnesota Vikings loss than Brian Murphy? Brian, you wrote in your column about how the Vikings had to sprinkle dirt on the grave of 2022, that the end of game magic disappeared yesterday in week one. And my question for you to start the show is just how upset should people be about the loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
I think maybe more at the timing of the loss than maybe the loss in general. I mean, it was sloppy, it was rusty. You can attribute that to not maybe getting a lot of first team rep work in preseason, if you will. The problem is you had a beatable opponent in a home game to start your season 4 days before you're going to one of your toughest matches of the season in Philadelphia. So they don't have a lot of time to either dwell on it or fix what happened. A lot of these were self-inflicted mistakes that coaches love to say we need to clean up. Well, they have a lot to clean up. They don't have a lot of time to do it. So I would be more upset with the opponent that they let off the hook, a very winnable game at home that sets an important tone, and the fact that they're going into one of their toughest matches of the season on a short week. That's what I would be upset with, because this could get really ugly really soon. And 0-2 is a lot different than 1-1. And 0-1 gets forgotten in the midst of a 17 game, 18-week season. But 0-2 is going to be very problematic. And you've already gotten a quick look at your divisional opponents. It looks like Green Bay isn't going anywhere, at least for now. Chicago maybe is choking on its own hype, and Detroit looks like it's thriving in its own hype. So you already, 1 week into the season, sort of have a roadmap of where this is going. And the manner in which they lost yesterday, I could stomach more if the timing wasn't as bad as it was.
Yeah, and I mean, week one losses happen. That doesn't mean anybody's season is over because there's a long way to go. And historically, there's a chart that used to be tweeted every, I don't know, like every year about how screwed you are after a loss early in the season. And week one was the least screwed, and that makes sense. But if you got to 0-3, basically your season was over. Now that's probably changed a little bit because there's 17 games, but I still buy that. And if you're going to Philadelphia and then the Chargers are coming here, the Chargers gave up a bunch of yards to Miami. So, maybe their defense is a bit of an issue, but they also put up 34 points and their quarterback is really good. Like, that's the snowball effect that can happen when you lose a game that you're not supposed to lose. And I think that the main question coming out of it is really how much of what happened yesterday is going to keep happening. And that's the fundamental week one question around the NFL is, hey, is Dallas really that good? Is San Francisco really that good? Because we kind of talked about an open NFC. Didn't look like an open NFC yesterday. And oh, by the way, the Philadelphia Eagles had two of the top 10 pass rushers and pass rush win rate on the interior of the defensive line. So that could be a pretty serious problem for the Vikings, but they also did move the ball. Jefferson had a great game. They were in position to score two times where they fumbled weirdly, the fumble that will never be repeated, the right guard strip sacking his own quarterback, and then a weird, throw a little bit behind KJ Osborne that the defensive back made an incredible play and just came and stole the ball. Like, those usually turn into touchdowns or field goals, and they turned into turnovers, which yeah, obviously you don't get those back, but they were moving the ball fairly consistently there in the first half. So how much is actually a concern and how much is, hey, it just some weird stuff happened in week one?
It was a lot of weird stuff. But weird stuff should be preventable in some ways too. And you've been on the field now for 6 weeks. Maybe you didn't play your starters in the preseason, but that was. I mean, look, Tampa wasn't as sloppy, I don't think, as Minnesota was. I mean, they didn't have a turnover. Minnesota committed 3 turnovers. You mentioned, the right guard will never cross paths with Kirk Cousins in the pocket and knock the ball out. I don't know. This is Ed Ingram, who stomped on Kirk Cousins' toes and feet several times last year and caused the quarterback to go down in the pocket. I don't know if Ingram's cursed or is always in the wrong place at the wrong time. That was a very random event, knocking the ball out of Cousins' hands when he was sort of, on his way pulling and his hand just kind of flapped back. Okay, I'll chalk that up as a once every 15-year occurrence. Um, you know, Cousins acknowledged he tried to squeeze that pass to Osborne in at the goal line when it was a really tight window. He didn't seem too happy either with the play call or the result of the play afterwards. O'Connell said, "Fine, look, I want him to be aggressive, but that's a blown opportunity, a really hard turnover, as you mentioned. I think they had almost 300 yards at halftime, and Tampa had less than 100, and yet you're only 10 to 10, and it was easy to kind of get lulled into this sort of, well, they'll get it together, they'll find a way. And even in the last 5 minutes after McLaughlin hits that 57-yard line drive field goal to put Tampa up, you're thinking, how many times last year were they under more dire circumstances and they found a way to make a play on defense or offense or both? They did neither yesterday, and they allowed Baker Mayfield to essentially kneel down on a home game. You had to burn all your timeouts, one because you didn't line up properly on a field goal, and the other two on defense, and you never got the ball back. So there was never even a sense of, even O'Connell said, look, I thought if we got the ball back at the 1-yard line, we were going to have a chance to go down and make a play and win this game. They never got the ball at all. It was just sort of a slow, it wasn't a painful death. It was just a slow, sad death, I think, where everyone was looking around like, there's no more time on the clock. It's over. Now we got to go home. What do we make of that mess? Not an inspiring start, not a cataclysmic start. Again, it's the schedule, though, as you mentioned. You've got Philly on the road, the Chargers coming in, they can put up some points. And then, oh, by the way, who's lurking beyond that is you got Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. So, again, not a lot of time to really get this not only figured out, but also categorized as this is a one-off instance, or are there some patterns here that could be disturbing the rest of the way?
The point you bring up about the first half, the sad irony of that game for the Vikings is that they had a really good first half from the perspective of moving the football. And so you mentioned not playing in the preseason games, but when you look at how they played, minus the random events, and I know you can't take away those turnovers, but they are just kind of strange events. And if you take away those, their execution to come out of the gate was good. But you obviously can't have those. That's very clear. But it was, to me, it was the second half that was really problematic. Like, that was where they played bad football. They gave up a bunch of short completions, and the adjustments by Baker Mayfield and the Bucks coaching staff I thought were really excellent. When Kevin Seifert tweeted out the stats, or I'm actually he was tweeting out, yeah, he was tweeting out the blitz percentage, and then Andrew Kramer tweeted out the success of Baker Mayfield in the second half against those blitzes. After getting destroyed in the first half by them, Tampa was able to adjust to what they were doing blitz wise and found answers and move the football pretty consistently for these long, plodding drives. They kept Justin Jefferson on the sideline. And then when the Vikings did get the ball, they had one long drive themselves, but then they only had two other drives in the second half, and they gained a total of 6 yards. And I was looking at this too, Murph, yesterday. When they ran the ball on first down, they ran it like 9 times for 20 yards on first down. That was the whole thing that they talked about in the offseason is this is why we're bringing in big personnel. Like, this is why we're going to Alexander Madison, because he didn't have as many negative runs, and he didn't have many negative runs yesterday, but he also didn't have many big runs either. I think his longest was maybe the first play of the game when he got 8 yards. That's just unacceptable. And if that's how they're going to play against anybody with a halfway stout defensive line like Tampa Bay has, well, it doesn't speak well to what's going to happen in Philadelphia. But I also think that this inconsistency of, hey, we're going to move the ball in one half, but not in another. And there were a lot of third and fourth quarters last year, especially third quarters for the Vikings offense, where it didn't seem like their adjustments were very good to what the defense was doing, or they didn't have a counterpunch. And that to me is why they lost. Not even as much the turnovers, but in the second half of the game, if you're outplaying a team in the first half completely, my expectation is that you keep doing that and win in the second half because, oh, random stuff, but keep outplaying them. The fact that it was such a switch and they didn't outplay them in the second half, to me, was the more concerning thing than even the fact they had those turnovers.
And the fact that you didn't put down an inferior opponent early and let them kind of linger and loiter and maybe get some confidence that maybe we can do something. Yeah, okay, we got 95 yards at halftime, but hey, it's 10-10. We feel like we're already stealing a win and we're only halfway through. I also believe I wrote this down yesterday. I don't know if it's exactly true. Did the Vikings even have a first down in the fourth quarter? I don't believe they did. From what
No,
I think it was only the
no.
one drive. They went 3 and out, and then they never got the ball back. So again, you were sort of thinking, never mind even something magical or incredible or once in a generation that would happen. They couldn't even sustain a drive in the fourth quarter. I mean, I think there was a sense of, well, they're going to get it together. They're going to get a play. They're going to get the ball downfield. They're either going to get a field goal and knot this thing up, or they're going to take the lead and put it away. And it never happened. And I think that's what was a little bit shocking because we've been so conditioned to their miracles last season. This didn't even feel like there needed to be much of a miracle, just some competent play in the fourth quarter. Take care of business, get an ugly win. Let's get out of here, clean some things up, but at least you're sitting at a 1-0 as opposed to 0-1. And it's interesting. So last year, they go to Philadelphia in week 2 on a Monday night, so they get a little bit of a longer week. They pretty much get schooled by an elite NFC team, obviously one that qualifies for the Super Bowl, but they had the safety net. And that safety net was the blowout win at home in week 1 against Green Bay, which, oh, by the way, that could have been the game where you were disorganized and ruffled and not as confident with a new coach and a new scheme and all of the question marks. Here, this is, you didn't even change your roster that much. It's not like there were a ton of surprises here. You came out flat in a home game where, look, the team is honoring the legacy of its greatest coach ever who passed away in the offseason. A lot of buzz about the 1970s Super Bowl teams. Clearly, the stakes, the team knows what their schedule, what the stakes are. It's disappointing that they came out and played the way they did, the manner in which they lost. And again, the timing really puts a lot of pressure on this team. Now, we know they're talented enough to win and compete with Philadelphia. I mean, it's unlikely, but they can. And we know their resilience level. They had a lot of battle scars last year. They've earned a lot of, opportunity to give them the benefit of the doubt, but you're quickly running out of time. It's getting, as Yogi Berra said, it's getting late early. And I think we're going to be sitting here probably contemplating an 0-2 start that puts them in a position where you're panicking and scrambling early. And then that's when you start as a team maybe doing things that are outside your comfort zone, either individually as players because they feel like they need to do more to turn it around, or even as a coaching staff where you start getting more aggressive. I don't want to say panicky, but you're getting a little bit more aggressive and maybe straying outside your lane a little more. It could make big things happen. You could make up ground in a hurry, but you could also perpetuate the mistakes you're already making. So there's a lot riding on these next couple of weeks.
Yeah, it sort of had a 2021 opener at Cincinnati feel. Now, we didn't know at the time that Cincinnati was going to the Super Bowl. So at the time, we talked about that loss. Like, this is a bad one. Cincinnati's not a great team. And, but the thing is that they were on the doorstep of winning that game and they outplayed Cincinnati in a lot of ways, but they end up fumbling in overtime, losing that game. And it was like, well, even though a lot of areas of your game were actually good, you can't just take it back. And then they ended up going to Seattle and losing. They ended up having the Titans beat them, and all of a sudden it was like, like this thing is kind of rolling off the. I think it was the Titans. However it went. Oh, it was Arizona, and then it was, I think, going to Seattle. I'm mixing up my years. It was going to Seattle, and then they lost in the last second to Russell Wilson, and then all of a sudden it was like this train is starting to go off the rails pretty early. And in both 2020 and 2021, they were kind of chasing from behind in the middle of the season. And that's what can happen fast here. By the way, Philadelphia opens up as 7.5 point favorites over the Vikings at Philadelphia. So if you wonder what the world thinks of this game, they do not think that the Vikings have a whole lot of a chance when you go over a touchdown for a game like this as far as favorites go. So here's what I'm wondering about though, Murph. Do we would we rather talk about like what can get better or just like blame people for what happened? Which would you rather do? Like which do you rather feel like on a Monday morning? Talk about where it could actually improve, or do we want to point some fingers?
I would be more inclined to point more fingers if there was a sense of defiance or you guys don't know what you're talking about. This is a one off. Um, they owned their mistakes yesterday. I mean, they fell deeply on the swords as they had to. And I was kind of thinking about that. I'm like, well, how are they going to react to this? Because that was as ugly and sloppy as it's going to get to start the season at home against an inferior opponent. So they know where they know where they messed up. They know a little bit of who is responsible and for what and what timing. And I think the difference right now between that 0-1 Cincinnati loss is that that was sort of the beginning of the end of the Mike Zimmer era, where the claws started coming out, and as we found out after he was fired, how nasty and ugly it got, and how insecure and indecisive and just sort of maniacal he became in that locker room. Look, Kevin O'Connell's still got a heck of a honeymoon period here. I think they're still going to run through walls for him. He's still got their back. He was very, uh, he put a lot on his shoulders about what went wrong, and he talked collectively about mistakes and things that couldn't happen and shouldn't happen. But he really wasn't going to, even on either subtle snide remarks where exactly what Zimmer was saying when he wasn't saying it. O'Connell hasn't gone down that road yet either. So I would rather talk about what can get better. Problem is, they can get a lot better in the next 4 days and still lose by 10 points in Philadelphia. So I'd be curious what you think they can do better. Running game, no doubt. Unforced errors, no doubt. Ball security, no doubt they can get better. Where else should they really be improving right now? What else was suspect that you noticed that maybe didn't get the scrutiny that it should have, either post game or even today, because there were so many other ugly errors? You almost don't look at the systemic ones that could be more long term problems.
And when you talk about that, of course, we have to talk about the offensive line. And that's something that is hard to say you could see getting better. Christian Darrisaw looked like he was pretty beat up after that game with his ankle injury that he suffered earlier in the game. And so his status is very questionable for Thursday. And then what he's going to look like if he does play, Garrett Bradbury, that doesn't sound great. He went to the locker room very quickly after going into the injury tent. And if you're trying to recover in 3 days from a back injury, as someone who has routine lower back problems, let me tell you, not easy. Not easy to do. No matter what you do to those, sometimes like there's no like tape it up when it comes to the back injury. Like that could be a real lingering problem, and the fact that he had it last year also is pretty concerning. So I would guess that they're going to have Austin Schlottman up front and possibly Oli Udo at left tackle against the Eagles, which is a huge problem. And I thought that you mentioned Kevin O'Connell's comments. The only time where I felt like he was a little pointed, not in a Zimmer way, because that's just calling people out and, like you said, making passive aggressive, snarky comments. It wasn't like that. But I got the quote here. O'Connell said, up front, I think we just got to get a little bit more movement, a little bit more connectedness on our combinations and try to get efficient as we possibly can, and then have ways of generating explosives in the run game. I mean, to me, that's as pointed as he gets. Like, you need to block. I mean, even Kirk Cousins after the game saying like Alexander Madison ran hard all day is basically saying you need to block, and they didn't. And that was the concern the whole time leading up to Tampa Bay was whenever an opposing team has a great couple of defensive linemen, we always sort of send up the radar, put it on alert, like this could be a bad one. And you go to Philly and they got this great defensive line. I think that's something that can't really be fixed. What can be fixed is you can have some run game because they had none yesterday. I also think that just when you're coming, like there are some things that Kevin O'Connell does, or that maybe it's Kirk Cousins' decisions, where I think it's 3 or 4 plays a game where I just go, I don't really get it, man. I'm sorry, but I don't really get it. A tight end screen. I don't get it. You have the best weapons in the world. That play just needs to be burned. Throw it out back in the pit, in the fire, and light it up. That thing gone. Never throw a tight end screen ever again. Just don't throw to CJ Ham. Just stop it. And I think that this idea of CJ Ham playing on third downs where he's going to be the pass protector, the problem with that is then he can't be a weapon because he just isn't. I mean, they tried to throw to him a couple times. He dropped one of them. Like that, it's just that's who he is. He's just not a weapon. He's a traditional fullback. And I think that there's just a couple of plays there where you could say, you know what? Get the ball to Osborne, get the ball to Addison, get the ball to somebody else. Throw the ball down the field to TJ Hawkinson if it's not working. And sometimes if you're going to throw a quick pass to somebody, let's not make it CJ Ham. Like and get the running back screen game going. Like there's play calling stuff in the second half of that game where you kind of like I think that I don't like criticizing play calling because if it works, then they're a genius. But there are some things that just logically speaking could be thrown in the trash after that game that might help them get rolling a little bit more. But it's going to be hard, Murph, to overcome that offensive line if they are not healthy. They're not even, to me, trustworthy when they're healthy.
Well, picking up on that thread a little bit too, I think you mentioned the tweet that Kevin Seifert of ESPN had put out. I saw it this morning too, where the Vikings blitz was at 42.7% or 43% of the time, top in the league. Well, guess who was number two? Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay said, you know what? The Vikings have a soft and suspect offensive line, especially in the interior. We're not going to give Cousins time to set up shop. We're going to attack him. We're going to go after him. And especially in that first half, Cousins absorbed some wicked hits. There was a lot of free defenders coming at him. And everybody, I keep thinking of that Netflix documentary where he was down on the ground moaning, and you could practically hear his ribs cracking on the mics. How we knew he was taking hits last year. We didn't know the extent to which they were borderline knocking him out of not only a game but long term, and how he had to manage that throughout the season. We only saw that in retrospect. Well, you don't think Philadelphia's licking their chops again at the notion that they can attack, especially at home with crowd noise? So yeah, getting the ball down the field sounds ideal. I don't know if Cousins is going to have time. He didn't have a ton of time yesterday, and when he did have time, he was a little bit inaccurate. So I'd like to see, okay, if you're going to patch this together with backups on the road against one of the fiercest defenses in the league, you're going to have more problems. So they're going to have to be more creative in getting him some additional protection, rolling him out maybe a little bit more, creating time to get that ball downfield, because Tampa decided, you know what, we see a vulnerability. We're going to attack on the road, and we're going to, roll the dice and see what happens. Well, it worked out fairly well for them defensively.
Yeah, if you go back to 2018, and this is how long we've been talking about the offensive line issues, it's just remarkable. But in 2018, I know it didn't work out long term with John DeFilippo as their offensive coordinator, but I thought he went into Philadelphia with a great game plan, which was to get the ball out of Kirk Cousins' hands as fast as possible. And I know that Kevin O'Connell wants longer developing routes. He was running a lot of play actions, which I thought some of them worked extremely well. But with Philadelphia, they have had this good defensive line, it feels like forever. That's kind of how they won the Super Bowl in 2017. And I mean, you're just going to have to find those answers with the quick passing game because there won't be that many opportunities to just sit back there on a long developing route and throw 20, 30 yards down the field to Justin Jefferson. So I do think that, what Kirk Cousins said after the game about the skill players playing well, I thought for the most part, the receivers did have a good day and showed everything you have there. Like Addison can play. His third down route, like his touchdown was nice because obviously he just ran by the guy, but he had a third down in 13 or something like that where he got right to the sticks, ran a really nice route, made a play, got a first down. Like that's the weapon that you have now. And so I think they could build on that. But if you have no running game and every time you run on first down, you start on 2nd and 8, like that hurt them last year and it's going to hurt them again. And I think the best we've ever seen Kirk Cousins, I know a lot of people would say last year was it. I think it was 2019 when he was operating with a great running game and a lot of comfort where the defense had to respect the run. The fact that they don't now is problematic. So, Murph, last thing. Okay, so we're like the panic meter and everything, it's probably pretty high after this. But if there's one reason to not freak out completely, it's that Brian Flores had a pretty darn good debut on the defensive side. That Tampa Bay team put up like 240 yards, completely different look from what we saw last year. What did you think about the way that kind of this new look defense came together?
Well, it looked like they were. I mean, we knew they were going to blitz more. That's how Flores came as advertised, and they did. And they were able to stifle. I mean, again, it's Baker Mayfield. So, what are we making of Baker Mayfield? 5.0 or whatever version this is. 4 teams in 4 years, whatnot. I thought he was regressing toward XFL levels there until the fourth quarter, when he did make a couple of key plays, both with his legs and his arm, uh, that mattered. Well, Baker Mayfield is not Jalen Hurts. So they're going into Philadelphia. How aggressive will Flores be? Will it be even more aggressive and more rolling of the dice in a more hostile environment where one mistake or one blown coverage or one big play can really set the tone early and get that stadium rocking? Again, where I would say I feel good about the Vikings' chances of maybe pulling an upset more this year than I even did last year, even coming off of that big Green Bay win, is the fact that they have accumulated so much resilience and so much trust in Kevin O'Connell and so much trust in each other, those that are back, that I feel like there's probably going to be a little bit more panic out in the media, out in the fan base because of the circumstances than there would be in house. Whereas 2 years ago, I feel like the panic was in the building as well. So that's the one thing that I can build on, is that I think they are in a better position to correct mistakes, stop the bleeding, and maybe pull off an upset, or at least play well enough to give you confidence that, look, if they're coming out 0-2, it's going to be a long uphill climb. But I have a feeling they're not going to get blown out of the stadium on Thursday night like they were last year on Monday night. So if they're going to reward that faith, or are they going to just blow it up and really find themselves in a hole? I'm going to be watching to see how they kind of react mentally, because one thing that there was some chatter in the room yesterday too, and this is something that they can draw on. We all remember that Dallas home game last year when, I mean, I don't know, 30 plus point blowout. Then they had to follow up 4 days later against New England. Now, granted, they were at home, but another national television audience, and they played arguably one of their better games against New England. Not only how they played, but how they responded. So, how are they going to respond to this latest challenge, knowing that 0-2 is going to look and feel a hell of a lot worse than 1-1 will?
And I also think, I saw a lot of people yesterday and they were asking me like, hey, is it time to tank or something? It's like, okay, well, hold on, everybody. So 0-1. It's 0-1. Last year, they went to Buffalo and they beat the Bills in a game where they were something like 10-point underdogs or whatever it was. I forget what it was. They were big underdogs against the Bills and they won the game. Like, it happens. It happens all the time. That when in the NFL, when you have a good team and they have a good team, if they're a little better than you, then the odds are like 60-40, which means 4 out of 10 times you win that game. So, I think that you shouldn't write this one off, and especially it's a short week, which I think benefits the Vikings to put it behind them quickly. And yes, they have to travel. That's annoying, but travel it's not as big of a problem as it used to be back in the day. I mean, back in the day, home field advantage was massive. Even in Philadelphia, the actual numbers for home field advantage are not that impressive like they used to be before travel is what it is and everything else. So I mean, no, it's not time to completely throw this season in the trash. We're going to play football until January, so there's plenty of time here. But if you get an upset win, then all of a sudden it's all gone. Like it's right back to square one, and you're kind of good to go. And expectations return to the same. 0-2 is a lot bigger of a hole to dig themselves out of. So this is a huge swing game for how we feel about the season. Make sure you check out Murph's article. From inside U.S. Bank Stadium, by the way. Last year's Magic put in the rear view in Week 1. That's at purpleinsider.com. Great stuff. Great to have you back inside the press box as well, Murph. And we'll be doing this every Monday morning, including even with the Thursday night game and everything else. We'll just be doing it Monday morning again. So great to have you back on Purple Insider. I'm excited for what's to come this season, and we will talk again soon, Murph.
Football.